So this is called the Peacock Despair. Um, Jack Sutton was a Canadian fly tyer that developed this in the 1930s. It was a popular fly for large brook trout in eastern Canada. It was designed to imitate a stonefly or dragonfly nymph, but he also considered it as a crane fly imitation. The legs can be oriented to point up or down. Uh, the way I've seen it tied, Hans Weilandman, if you've never seen his fly tying videos on YouTube, he's amazing. Um, Pretty dry, cadence and everything, but he's just a very talented tyer. Very every wrap of his thread means something, and he's somebody to learn from. He did this fly in 2012 on his YouTube channel. But anyway, back to Jack Sutton. He worked in the fishing tackle department at Simpson's store in downtown Toronto. And he was a great angler, fly tyer, rod builder, and one of the best tournament casters in Ontario and Quebec in his time. So for this fly, it really has a lot of the similar color to, of course, the Peacock Herl and white and brown and some different colors. But the materials that are used for this, Peacock Herl for the body, and of course the strung Peacock Herl is what I'll use for this. Strung Peacock Herl is basically the if you look at the whole peacock eye feather, all of the strands that hang off the side of the feather, all of the barbules, I guess they would be, that's what's actually stripped off and then strung basically with a cotton string to make it into a bundle. And so I'll use some of that. The butt and the rib is the original was 4 strands of floss, of nylon floss, twisted, and then used as the butt and the rib. But that's pretty delicate stuff and easy to break. I like to use this red crystal flash and grab a strand of that and use that as the so can you see those materials okay? I'll move some more light on it. With the
Yes, sir.
crystal
They're good.
flash,
They're good, Mike.
yeah, if you take the hank out of this package, you see a lot of people that tie flies and they have a real tangled up, mess with the crystal flash. If you just kind of cut a corner of it and stick the tip of your scissors in there and grab a strand, you can just pull it out of there and then cut that strand free, and it keeps everything together and you don't end up with a mess. So I've got a strand of this. I'll move over to my tying stuff. The legs on it will knot some pheasant tail legs real quick. It's just basically the fibers from pheasant tail knotted into legs. I think this looks really cool. The example that I have here is on a regular nymph hook. But I think it looks really cool on a scud hook. So I'm going to do that for the actual demonstration. And then the wing is, the original was a partridge breast feather. I'm pretty low on partridge, but I have a whole lot of this mallard flank. And this is the stuff that I actually dyed thanks to a recipe from Al using onion skins to dye it to more of a wood duck color. And so I'm going to use some of that, the smaller ones. And then it has a hackle of badger hackle. And I just have a cheap India neck here, a badger. I love badger hackle. And some of these smaller ones especially don't have the best markings. but I'll use that as the hackle. So we'll go back to the fly. And I'm going to put on my reading glasses first. Usually it takes me about halfway through the fly to do this, to do that part. And I'll put the hook in the vise. I'm going to use, you could use 6/0 thread. That's what I actually put in the pattern sheet that that John sent around. I'm going to use 8/0 because that's what I have loaded right now. This is actually a uni thread, but there's no reason you couldn't use any thread that you have. Even some of the finer, like Semperfly or some of the nano silk type threads. I'm
Mike,
just going
is
to
that
start.
a clink hammer hook?
Pardon me?
Is that a clink hammer hook?
It's just a scud hook. It's very similar to a clink hammer hook. I think normally a clink hammer hook has a little bit more straight of a shank here before
Okay.
it starts to make the bend. This is
It's
kind
just
of
got a
more.
wide gape to it, you know?
It does have a very wide gape, so it's a scud. What do they normally call them? A scud shrimp. They're used a lot for caddis pupae. I'm just going to lay down a little bit of a thread base. And straighten this hook a little bit more here. So first material I'm going to tie in, actually, this doesn't really have a tail. I'm going to go ahead and tie in the rib material. And so a little tip with materials like this crystal flash, I'm just going to try to come around here and tie that in. You see how it flips it around to the other side, and sometimes it's a struggle to get that to work right. So if you take your material and come up around so I'm in front of the thread, but I come up around the back of the hook and I can just set that right on top. And then it's got my material trapped in there. So now I can pull it back to the length I want and then just tie it in. I'm going to go a little bit further down the bend of the hook. On a standard nymph hook, you don't want to go too far down around the bend. But even on a scud hook, you don't want to really go more than about maybe like about a 45-degree angle if you hold it to the hook point. So that's going to be my rib. And then the body, like I said, is peacock herl. And I basically took 3 peacock herls from the strung bundle that I have. And even on strung peacock herl, the tips here are really delicate. So a lot of times I'll just snap those off like that. And that way I won't end up breaking one of my pearls off. So then I'll just work that toward the front. And I'm tying down the waist of that red crystal flash. So now I've got that all tied down. I'm going to just with spaced wraps like this, I'm just going to kind of go back to the back of the hook. Take maybe a couple of turns here. Now, to make my flies stronger, one of my favorite ways to do peacock herl, stretch out my thread a little bit to make it nice and long. I'll zoom out here if I can. So I have my thread stretched out a little bit, and I'm just taking the peacock herl and I'm wrapping it from back around to the front to get it twisted onto the thread a little bit. And then you can take the thread and the peacock herl and just kind of twist it. So that makes it to where it's the thread twisted up with that herl, and it makes it real strong. And I'll move that forward down the hook shank to the point where I started my thread. It was about a little over an eye length back from the eye there, about 2 eye lengths back. That gives me room to tie everything else in at the front. Make a few wraps, and then I'll cut off that waist. Now, so my bobbin doesn't swing too much, I'm going to shorten it. I'm going to take this crystal flash and start working down the bend a little bit and create a little bit of a tag or a butt back here. Go down about maybe 4 turns there, and then come back up. So that just gives me a little bit of a pronounced red hot spot there at the end.
Mike,
now,
and so may I ask a
Yeah.
question? So it's
Yeah.
okay. You let it go flat instead of trying to keep it curly cued, right? You know how it's kind of stranded over? Okay.
Right. I'm basically using this as a tinsel.
Okay.
So now I'm starting to make spaced wraps up through the peacock herl. And that's going to further reinforce that peacock herl. So if a fish's tooth hits that, it's not going to break
Have you ever tried to reverse wrap that, Mike?
You could do either.
Yeah.
I think
I found that when I reverse wrap it, it stands out a little bit better.
I was exactly what I was going to say. If you reverse wrap, that red will stand out a little bit more, or gold or whatever you're using for your ribbing.
You mean going from front to back, right?
Um,
I think that's what you mean by reverse. I'm learning terms.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's fine. So tell you what, I'll when we do the Prince Nymph, I'll reverse wrap that and I'll show you what we're talking about. That'll be a good example of that. So there's the body of the Peacock Despair. So the next thing I'm going to do is the legs. Now, unless you get a center tail feather of a pheasant, you'll normally have one side that's a little bit longer than the other. Usually if I'm knotting pheasant tail, I want a nice long fiber so I don't have trouble, making the turns and everything. I'm going to take two fibers there. I'm just going to strip those off. I'm going to make a loop like that. And then I'll take a tweezers here. I don't know if it's focusing on all that. Whoops.
It's a little high, Mike. You're just a little bit high, sir.
All right. I messed up, so I'll do it again. All right. So I made a loop there. So that's behind. So I'll take the end with tweezers. It would have been real handy to have these pre-done before and just kind of show you how I do it. Al, I need the tool that you used in a video a few years ago that has a gate on it.
Gretchen just says, hey, send him a leg nut tool tomorrow. So there'll be one in the mail to you, buddy.
You don't need to use the mail. You can just bring it next week.
Oh, hey, that's right. Okay, can do.
Right.
Called a nitpicker, by the way. And it might be easier, Mike, if you put your tweezers through the loop first and then grab the legs and pull them back.
The hardest part is trying to do it between the camera and everything else. So I'm going to go ahead and tie this off camera.
And with a little bit of luck, I'll have access to 12 to 18 pheasants on opening day pheasant season in Iowa.
Really?
Yeah, and probably a very, very large quantity of mallards. There's a guy that hunts mallards and other ducks up in Lake Erie. And so I've already sent John a picture of one of the mallard pelts that I already have access to.
Nice.
So feathers for everybody that wants them.
Mallard wings
Yep,
and
all of it.
the mallard flank feathers are probably the best things to harvest off of a mallard. The
Okay.
wing quills and the flank feathers. I'll show you
I
here.
look forward to be getting some that I can dye and do some married wing flies with.
Yeah.
You need to use white ones if you're going to dye them, but
Yeah.
All right. So what I did was I used the butt ends of the feather. I didn't remember I did that last time, to pass that through the hole to make the knot. So I've got 2 knotted legs here now.
A while ago, Al mentioned left leg and right leg. And I see he's getting something out of his microwave, depending on which way you did the knot. When he gets back, we might want to ask him.
I think if I was using more material than just 2 of these fibers, it would make a difference. But if you kind of look at that feather, it's pretty much straight.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not really a cant one way or the other, but
Yeah.
sometimes they do have a curvature. And so you want these to kind of bend in toward the body.
Okay.
This is probably the fiddliest part of this fly, is getting those legs to sit right. So what I have found is sometimes it's a little bit easier to just take one of them on the far side, take a couple wraps, and then look at it, adjust it around to the side. It doesn't sit right, come back, over exaggerate that towards me. Couple soft wraps there. Maybe I'll use that for this side and see if that works. That one hangs pretty good. Then for the other one, the thread torque is going to take that feather and want to spin that around. But in this case, I think I got it pretty good. All right, so I've got 2 legs. This one's a little bit too long. About right there. You want the knot on the legs to end up back around at the back of the body. About like that. And then I'll go ahead and cut off that material. Now for the wing, again, the original recipe called for 2 partridge breast feathers. This mallard flank is very inexpensive to buy it online. You can get a really large package for less than $10. So I'm just going to take 2 of them and kind of strip the bottom barbs down to make them close to the length that I need. I don't want to end up with a bunch of bulk at the eye there. I'm going to take it about right, maybe a little bit more, take it off right there. Okay. That should be enough to hold it. Now, with a lot of these kind of materials, since we're close to the eye, I'm I'm a few thread turns back from the eye. So if I cut that back there, I'm not going to be crowding the eye as much. So you always want to stay a little bit back from the eye when you're make those last thread wraps, so that when you cut it off, there's a space there. So I'm going to take this badger hackle, and I plucked one already that's good size for the hook. And I'm going to go back to where there's a real thick stem right here. And I want to get some of that black barring, but I don't want a real thick stem. So I'm going to come back to where that stem gets thin. Cut that off. And then again, without crowding the eye, that's just about right. I'm going to tie that in real tight. And then I'll grab the hackle pliers. And I want to make about, it depends on the quality of the feather. That's about maybe 4 turns. And then I'll make a turn around there to hold that feather steady, keeping my thread tight. Another one. And then I'll stroke all that back. Start at the front and come back to the back of the head. And now that takes that feather tip and points it toward the back. If you're real brave, you can snap that off. Otherwise, you can go in there with your tip of your scissors and carefully cut that off. Now, whip finish from back to front. Find my other leg here and get it on the right side of the wing. There's that leg and that leg. That turned out pretty good. A little head cement.
So Mike, I assume since you're using an India hackle, that this is a wet fly.
It is a wet fly.
Okay.
It is a nymph. I used a India neck. It's actually technically it's a rooster hackle. You could use these, especially the smaller guys. You could use those for dry flies. It's not the best quality in the world, but again, that's why they're so cheap. And
That's a perfect size for the tenkara flies I want to tie. Where'd you get that?
the what? This
The material. Yeah.
Hackle. Yeah.
I got that from Netcraft.
It's Amazon. There's a 3-pack you can buy for like $12.
I got it from Netcraft.
Crafters. Okay.
Yep. This calls it a #1 badger,
Okay.
and it was very cheap.
What'd you say, Bill?
I found a 3-pack with 3 different capes like that on Amazon for sale. That was very similar to that. I think it was like $12 for 3.
Okay.
You know, they're about that big, about that long, a little bit like what Mike has. His is probably a little bit better quality.
It says
Cool.
it's a grade 1 neck, but again,
Yeah.
it is an India neck. It's not a genetically modified whiting cape. Now, for the next fly, it's the Prince Nymph, and it's pretty common, pretty popular. This is probably the way that it's mostly tied today, with a gold bead. And a lot of times they'll put a red collar as kind of a hot spot. This has a little bit of lead wire underneath it. You can see the body is pretty bulky. The lead wire is shoved up into the bead. The only lead wire I actually have right now, even my non-lead wire, is 0.030, which is way too big for what I'm tying this as. Here's another way of doing it with a one of the 60-degree jig hooks and a slotted bead. A little bit smaller of a bead. But the Prince Nymph in the 1930s, Don and Dick Olson of Bemidji, Minnesota, created a fly called the brown forked tail. It was actually, the body was black ostrich herl, and the white biot wings curved up from the body. And then Doug Prince of Oakland, California, altered the fly in the 1940s with peacock herl as the body material, and the wings were curved down. The Prince Nymph was later modified to add lead wire underbody and a bead head. It's intended to represent a stonefly nymph and is often fished as a dropper below a high floating dry fly. This day, the Prince Nymph is one of the most popular flies for everybody. I mean, nationwide, and I think a lot of around the world. So for this, let me change my materials around a little bit here. See what you can see here. Making too much of a mess. This. All right. Switch cameras here. So the tail and the wings are goose biots. I really love this mahogany color. A lot of the brown that you get ends up being a real, almost ginger, like a real pale brown. And I've had those for years, and maybe that's why they're getting more pale. Normally they'll come in white, black, and brown. And what that is, what a goose biot is, this is a turkey feather. Goose primary feather, when you look at a feather like this, you've got the real long barbs that come off of this side, and these are all really short. And that's what that is that leading edge of the primary feather of a goose is where those are actually stripped off of. So we're going to use the white, these older white ones that I have, and these nice mahogany ones for the tail. For the hook, again, I'm using this is a 60-degree. I can move it up there and still have you see it. I think you can see that. A 60-degree bend in the eye there like that. And those are made for a slotted bead. I've got some copper ones here. I think in this case, I think I'm going to use the silver. Black nickel is what these are. But you could use a regular nymph hook and just use a regular, this is just a regular tungsten bead. Normally in these beads, you've got a large hole. I think, I don't know if you can see that. That hole right there facing up is really big. And then the other side of that is a small hole. And the small hole, of course, goes to the eye of the hook. And then the body is peacock herl, which we had before. We use that same strung peacock herl. And then it has a collar of, this is a real nice hen neck. This was from Hairline. Here's the package. A Hairline hen cape in brown. Again, I really like that rich color. So I'll use that for the collar of the fly. So switch back to the other camera. All right. I'm going to take one of these tungsten beads out of here. The tungsten bead, Tom Rosenbauer actually came up with the concept. He's kind of noted as the inventor of the tungsten bead. Brass beads were pretty much what everybody used for everything. And he was talking with a guy that dealt with tungsten. And so basically it was, you know, do you think you could make little beads out of that? Because it's so much heavier, so much more dense than brass or any of the other materials. So the same size bead in tungsten will be a lot, you know, just as heavy as a real large bead in another color. So in this case, sometimes you can get the bead to come around the bend of the hook. You put the small hole forward, and a lot of times you can get it to come around the bend of the hook without bending down the barb. But in this case, I'm kind of limited because I have to reach out so far to get between the camera and where my vise is so I can show it to you. But I'm going to go ahead and pinch down the barb in this case. So just basically carefully set that in there and just pinch that barb down. And then if I can see the hole, there it is. Get that in the small hole and then pass it around the bend of the hook. I have not had that much of a problem. This hook is really, there it goes. I think I had a little bit of material in that slot part of the bead, because then it went just very easily. So you just kind of spin that bead around until that slot lets it fall nice and close to the hook eye like that. Let's go ahead and I'll use the same thread. And I'll start my thread right behind the bead and head backwards. And clip off the tag and my rib, which I didn't talk about. I'm going to use some gold. I'll use silver tinsel. So this, don't know if you can see that. I think you can. This is gold on one side, silver on the other. That's how the Mylar tinsel usually comes. That's the silver side. So I want to tie it with the gold side facing me. And I'll let that, I'll let thread torque take that tinsel around to the back side of the hook. And I'll go right. Actually, I want to come a little bit forward of the barb of the hook, where the barb would have been if I wouldn't have pinched it down. Now I'm going to take 2 of those biots. There's a lot of tricks to tying these in. Where you run into trouble, you want those biots to be forked in the back. So if you take, I have 2 biots here that I stripped off. I'm going to peel them apart.
I can't see what you're doing, Mike. I mean, is there,
Okay.
just so I
Right.
understand, I know they're triangled.
Right. Peeling them apart, and then I want to get them to where they're facing opposite. So you can see the part that I peeled away from the stem. And I want to get those to where they're facing in opposite directions. So they're splaying out from each other. Actually, with this small of a hook, here's what I'm going to do. And it's probably the easiest way to get these on. You want about 1/2 to 3/4 of the length of the hook shank. So I'll take that and I'll splay it out to the far side. And I'll make a couple of turns. Then I'll take the other one and make it even. That's pretty even. Now my tails are forked. Now I'm going to
I
come
agree,
forward.
Mike. That
Pardon me?
is the hardest part of this fly. It's also the hardest part of a copper john to me,
Right.
is getting those tails on.
So it's a lot of times easier. There's a lot of little tricks and stuff. Tim Flagler does an interesting one where he ties them in together and folds one over. Once you get the hang of that, it's pretty easy. But to do it with a small hook and a camera, it's not that
Yeah, I've
easy.
seen
So,
people bring them in from the bottom too.
right.
Display them, bring them in from the bottom, and then tie them down that way. So there's a lot of different ways. But your way, I think, is the easiest.
Right. Tie one in and get that to how you want it, and then get the other one in at the same length.
Nice.
So now again, we're going to grab, I'll get 3 peacock curls. Get them to where they're even. I even them up at the butts here. And then I'll come out and just either break off or cut off about 1 inch of those tips. You're going to have plenty of material to use, but those tips are usually real brittle and they will break on you. So if you go down the stem a little ways, you shouldn't have too much trouble. So again, I'm tying that peacock curl in, and I'm going to come around the back. And I'm going to twist up that peacock curl around my thread. And then just kind of give it a spin with the thread and the hurls in my hand.
Almost kind of like a dubbing noodle.
Exactly. And again, I want to come forward, but leave myself a little bit of room because I have to tie in the hackle, and I have to tie in those white biots. So you can see I'm leaving a little bit of space behind that bead. And the good thing about twisting that hackle up, that hurl up like that, is I can let go just about, and it's not going anywhere. I'll take a couple good wraps here in front, in back, just make sure it's nice and secure there. Cut that off. Now, to reverse, actually, I have my, you remember I said I wanted it to go to the back of the fly?
Yeah.
For ribbing. In order to reverse rib, I am actually going to mess with the tail. That's not going to work. But to reverse rib, I'll just explain it to you, is to come in the opposite direction you would normally tie. So
Gotcha.
I tied the peacock curl in this way. So if you picture that as a spiral going forward, over, if you come back the opposite direction with the, actually that is going silver, but you don't mind the tail being tweaked a little bit. I'll do my silver rib here. Base wraps going in the opposite direction that peacock curl was wrapped. So that makes it stand out. and be a little bit more silver than it would have been. If it was wrapped in the same direction, it would be buried down inside the hurl more. So reverse wrapping it, like John said, just basically makes it stand out a little bit more because it crosses the material. And that tail
I was
doesn't look
thinking
bad.
I was thinking you're going from head back to tail, and it's like, okay, now how do I do, based on where stuff was ending up at? Okay, now I understand. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Just clockwise versus counterclockwise.
Right. Now for the white biots, I'll do those next. Actually, let me do the hackle first. So I sized this ahead of time. Basically, you want bend the down a little bit. You can take that feather and bend it around, and then look at where those barbules are going to end up, and kind of see if you have the right size of a hackle there. And
What is the right size, Mike?
normally this is a size 14 hook. For a wet fly, if you were actually looking at it on a hackle gauge, which one, there's a
My shit's
hackle,
all buried.
there's a hackle gauge. It's kind of hard to see, but this would actually be, you stand these straight out, and then hold the baseline up to that bottom line there. This actually looks like a 12. So for a wet fly, the hackle is swept back. It's not like a dry fly where you want it to be about, 1.5 hook gaps. In this case, you want the hackle to kind of flow a little bit and be a little bit longer. So for a
Yeah, I'd
size
always
14 hook, in this case, I'm using about a size 12 hackle.
Yeah, I'd always heard, and when I was first taught that, Don Peterbaugh said when you wrap the hackle around the hook, you want the fibers for a wet fly to be a little bit beyond the point, and for a dry fly to be at or a little bit short of the point.
There's a lot of schools of thought. A lot of the fancy Catskill dry flies, they'll go about 1.5 times the hook bend. So it would be down to about, the hackle would be down to about here for the dry hackle. And then the longer tail would stand it up. So what I did, and I kind of went ahead of myself, I took the tip of that feather and I grabbed it by the tip and I stroked back fibers like that. I have plenty of feather here, so I'll do it again. And then I just cut it so there's a little bit of a triangle there. And that's what I'll use to tie it in. And now I'm tying that with the cupped side or the concave side back, so that when I wrap this, the hackle should lean toward the back. In this case, since I'm going in between that peacock hurl, it's kind of, should be enough. That was about 4 wraps. Cut out that stem. And now I'm going to take this hackle and just kind of stroke it down. And try to take a couple wraps so that it's almost like a beard. And there's not much hackle sticking up along the top. See that?
Yes, sir.
Then I'll take a nice white goose biot. Stretch that out to where I have two of them. I think that's two. And we'll do the same thing. Separate them. Now I did see a pretty cool trick where you get the wing about how you want it to be. Okay, I want it to be about that long. I'm going to come in with my scissors right behind the bead and cut. Make a few wraps, and that looks good. Now the reason for that, if you were to just to tie this in and then try to dig down in behind that bead and cut that material, it'd be almost impossible without leaving a big white stub sticking up there. So again, I'm going to cut it right at the back of the bead. That's a little bit long. I'm just going to take a smidgen off of there. That looks just about right. Make sure that's tied in real well. And then I'll whip finish right behind the bead. And that's a Prince Nymph.
I've caught more fish on that Prince Nymph than probably that and the Peacock Pheasant Tail are the two that
Right.